It is not a matter for the Chair. Now call the Minister to move the Ways and Means motion in respect of the Finance Bill. Minister to move formally.
Move formally.
The question is as on the order paper. True, Henry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to speak about the procedure being used here. This motion is very odd and worryingly symptomatic of a government avoiding its responsibilities to this House. Given that the government could have tabled an amendment of the law resolution that would have allowed them to add their new clause to the debate today without this unique usage of the standing orders. This resolution has prevented members from tabling any new clauses or amendments related to this subject because there's no time between the end of the debate and the beginning of the next one to table any relevant motions, as I would have liked to have done, for example, on the Highland energy rebate for people living amongst generating equipment planned and existing. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope sincerely that this unique usage of standing orders does not become standard, as any future legislation based on a Ways and Means resolution can be unilaterally changed with almost no notice and no opportunity for this House to table related amendments.
The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Contrary, no? The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Finance Bill not amended in committee and Public Bill Committee to be considered. Now.
We begin with Government New Clause 5, with which it will be convenient to consider other selected new clauses and amendments as listed on the order paper. Minister to move Government New Clause 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This government's aim is to grow the economy for the good of everyone, and our tax system is a key part of this. For households, higher taxes mean less financial freedom and less choice on how they spend their money. For businesses, they can mean less growth and investment, and for workers, that means fewer jobs. And that is why we need to grow our economy, to create jobs and to give ourselves the financial headroom to reduce taxes and remove the barriers to private sector investment. We must have a tax system which is supportive of business. And at Spring Budget 2023, the Chancellor set out his approach for a highly competitive business tax regime. By announcing generous tax incentives combined with a rate of corporation tax which remains the lowest in the G7, this government ensured the UK is one of the best places in the world for businesses to grow and invest. But we should not be satisfied with simply being one of the best. So this bill marks our next step in making the UK the best place in the world to do business. And we are taking huge, ambitious steps to make that a reality in the autumn statement and in this bill. For example, no other major economy has made full expensing permanent. It is a major step in encouraging more investment by giving a huge tax relief to those who invest. Alongside this, we've introduced a generous new regime for research and development carried out by companies. And we are now going further to encourage even more investment by introducing new Clause 5, which will exempt receipts from new electricity generating projects from the electricity generator levy. I'll now address each amendment in turn, Mr. Deputy Speaker, looking first at the details of new Clause 5. The Electricity Generator Levy, or EGL, was introduced following the energy crisis to ensure that energy companies with extraordinary returns contribute more towards vital public services and support for households. However, we have to balance this against ensuring the UK remains a brilliant place to invest in renewables. This clause makes changes to the EGL, which will exempt receipts from new electricity generating projects from the levy. This new Clause 5 ensures that all generators in scope of the levy will benefit from this exemption if they choose to proceed with investments in new generation capacity and make a substantive decision to go ahead with the project on or after the 22nd of November 2023, the date of the autumn statement. This will help support continued investment in the UK's renewable generation capacity by removing new investments from the tax and providing businesses with confidence to make these new investments. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'll now move on to Government Amendments 1, 2 and 3. To ensure the research and development tax relief clauses in the bill work as intended, the government is proposing technical amendments to the R&D clauses. This bill introduces a new enhanced support for R&D intensive SMEs like those in our vital life sciences sectors. From April 2024, the R&D intensity threshold will be reduced from 40% to 30%. Amendments 1 and 2 make changes to ensure R&D intensive companies get the relief as intended, and this amendment removes two situations where a company would appear less R&D intensive than they actually are. This was raised to us by an industry stakeholder, and I'm grateful for them raising these issues so we can resolve them. To avoid abuse and to protect the scheme for genuinely R&D intensive companies, the ratio is worked out at a group level. Currently in the legislation, companies within groups who charge each other for services could have costs double counted and therefore reduce their R&D intensity. And this amendment fixes this. The government does not want to exclude companies from relief because of legitimate commercial arrangements, which do not affect the underlying true R&D intensity of the business. Mr Deputy Speaker, on top of providing more support for R&D intensive companies, the bill will simplify and improve our R&D reliefs by merging the R&D SME scheme with the R&D expenditure credit. To ensure that these clauses work as intended, the government is proposing technical amendments to the R&D clauses. Companies and accountants wanted the merge scheme to be implemented on an accountancy period basis, as this makes claims simpler and delays the merge scheme for the majority of current R&D expenditure credit claimants. It therefore gives them a bit more time to prepare. The new rules for contracted out R&D will ensure the company making the decision to do the R&D and bearing the risk is the one who gets the relief. However, this means that as currently drafted, there could be temporary situations when two companies are in a contractual relationship and one moves into the new R&D tax credit system ahead of the other. For a limited period of time, this could result in situations where either both parties could claim on the same R&D or neither could claim. This was raised again by stakeholders, and this amendment, Amendment 3, ensures that the legislation works as intended. It does so in this way. For the temporary double claims, the R&D credit will go to the claimant in the old system until both have started new accounting periods. And to avoid a temporary gap where no company can claim, the legislation will be amended to ensure that subcontractors can claim where their customer is still in the old system. I also want to take the opportunity to clarify the language around the definition of contracted out R&D, as I appreciate some stakeholders have been concerned that the legislation allows a company to claim for a contractor's R&D if they merely think R&D will take place. This is not the case. The word contemplating has been deliberately used, as in legal terms, contemplating means the company will know specific actions are being considered, planned, and required for the R&D to take place, rather than just generally thinking R&D will take place. So the government will publish for comment updated guidance to help companies understand the new rules this week. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll turn next to Amendments 4 to 6. This bill has a package of groundbreaking reforms to reliefs to the creative industries. These amendments ensure that claims to the creative industries tax reliefs are submitted with the required information to effectively administer the reliefs while removing a potential disadvantage for companies. The government is legislating in this finance bill to introduce an additional information requirement for claims to the creative reliefs, and companies will have to provide additional information to support their claims, which will help protect the reliefs from fraud and error. But, as currently drafted, a claim is invalid if the required information is not provided. Where that information relates to connected party transactions, HMRC cannot verify it is complete and correct at the point the claim is submitted. If it is discovered at a later date that required information related to connected party transactions was omitted, this would lead to the whole claim being treated as invalid and no relief being granted. A company then may be out of time to resubmit their claim. So to prevent companies from being disadvantaged in this way, these amendments fix the additional information requirement to allow HMRC to specify the consequences of failure to provide information in regulations. And this will ensure that entire claims are not automatically invalidated in cases where the claimant company has not provided HMRC with all the information related to their connected party transactions within the time limit. Mr Deputy Speaker, I have outlined the case for each of the government amendments, and I therefore urge the House to accept all of these amendments.
Question is that Government New Clause 5 be read a second time. Opposition front bench. James Murray.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move new clauses 6 and 7 in my name and that of my honourable friend, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll begin by addressing our new clause 6, which relates to permanent full expensing. And to do so, let me remind the House of the context in which this finance bill was published. That context is that this bill followed the Chancellor's statement on November the 22nd last year, in which he claimed that he was delivering an autumn statement for growth. As members will remember, however, that same day the Office of Budget Responsibility confirmed growth forecasts had been cut by more than half for the coming year, cut again for the year after that, and cut yet again for the year after that. Independent analysts confirmed that even after all the changes the governments had announced, personal taxes would still rise. We know that personal taxes are set to rise by £1,200 per household by 2028-29, with the tax burden on track to be the highest since the Second World War. That was the context in which this bill was published: flatlining wages, higher taxes, higher mortgage payments, and worsening public services, all the product of 14 years of Conservative economic failure. Our country needs change, and a critical part of making that change will be to get our country's growth rate up. We need a plan for growth to make people across Britain better off and to make sure we have sustainable funding for our public services. In Labour, we have been developing our plan for growth by working hand in hand with businesses across the country and across the economy. We know how highly businesses who are considering investing in the UK rate stability, predictability, and a long-term plan. And it is for that reason that we welcome the fact that, as our new Clause 6 highlights, this bill makes full expensing permanent. Permanent full expensing is something we have long called for as a policy that can support greater business investment and economic growth. And because we know how important stability and predictability are to businesses, my Right Honourable friend, the Shadow Chancellor, announced last week that Labour is committed to maintaining permanent full expensing in the UK tax system, as well as the annual investment allowance if we win the next general election. The Shadow Chancellor has made this commitment to offer businesses certainty for the years ahead. Businesses considering plant and machinery investment across Britain can be confident that the tax treatment of that investment would not change with a Labour government. Of course, there is still a general election to face, and so I'd like to use this opportunity to invite the Minister to put on record whether the Conservatives will follow our lead by confirming that, should they win the general election, will they maintain permanent full expensing. I am sure many businesses would welcome the certainty that would come from knowing both main parties are going into the election fully committed to keeping permanent full expensing. And so I would urge the Minister to use this opportunity when he responds to confirm whether this will be his party's policy going into the general election this year. I feel, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Minister needs to make this commitment explicit after all the chopping and changing we have seen in capital allowances in recent years. As I mentioned at earlier stages of this bill's consideration, the annual investment allowance had been raised to £1 million on a temporary basis when this Parliament began. That temporary basis was extended by the Finance Act 2021, extended again by the Finance Act 2022, and then made permanent by the Finance No. 2 Act 2023. Meanwhile, over the course of this Parliament, the super deduction came and went. Last year, full expensing for expenditure on plant and machinery was introduced on a temporary basis for 3 years. And in this bill, the government are now finally making full expensing permanent. And so, after so much instability, a commitment from Treasury ministers at the dispatch box today that they, like us, will commit to maintaining permanent full expensing feels like the least they can do. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, our new Clause 6 would require the Chancellor not only to publish an assessment of the impact of permanent full expensing, but also a consideration of what other policies would support its effectiveness. We believe this is important to make sure that business investment is supported as much as possible, And in the opposition, we have begun to set out what some of these policies would be if we won the next general election. For instance, as the Shadow Chancellor has set out, if we were in government, we would consider the outcome of technical consultations on whether leased assets can be included in full expensing and on simplifying the UK's capital allowance regime. I would be grateful if the Minister could update us when he replies on the progress of these consultations. The Shadow Chancellor also made clear last week the commitment that if we win the next general election, we will ask HMRC to produce simple and comprehensive guidance making clear which assets are eligible for each type of capital allowance. This guidance would give businesses clarity over how their investments will be treated, and businesses will be able to use this as a single point of reference when making investment decisions. So can the Minister confirm whether or not the government has considered taking such steps or making such a commitment too? To give further certainty, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Chancellor also said that in government, Labour would explore the greater use of rulings and clearances. Under such an approach, businesses would be able to get a written ruling from HMRC about the tax treatment of potential investments, making clear, for instance, whether they qualify for full expensing or other capital allowances. Now, we know that businesses benefit from other countries' tax administrators being able to provide such rulings and clearances, and so as certainty is so crucial for encouraging investment here in Britain, I would be grateful if the Minister, when he responds, could confirm whether the Treasury has asked HMRC to consider the greater use of rulings and clearances for investment, and if so, what their conclusion has been. Now, of course, any policies on expensing or other capital allowances sit under the headline rate of corporation tax. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is hard to conclude anything other than that the Conservative Party are rather unclear and confused about their approach to corporation tax rates in the UK. For evidence of this, we need look no further than the current Chancellor himself. In July 2022, during his leadership bid, the current Chancellor pledged to cut the headline rate of corporation tax from 19% to 15%. Yet, when he became Chancellor just 3 months later, one of his first acts in that role was to promise to raise it instead from 19 to 25%. It is no wonder businesses and indeed Conservative backbenchers find it so hard to understand the Conservatives' policy on corporation tax rates. So let me be clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, about the certainty we would offer if we win the next general election. As the Shadow Chancellor has set out, we believe the current rate of 25% strikes the right balance between what our public finances need and, as the lowest rate in the G7, keeping our corporation tax competitive in the global economy. That is why we are pledging to cap the headline rate of corporation tax at its current rate of 25% for the whole of the next Parliament. We would take action if tax changes in other advanced economies threaten to undermine UK competitiveness. That is a choice that provides predictability and that has a clear rationale. That is the pro-business choice and the pro-growth choice. Now, the promise to cap corporation tax at 25% from us is clear. And so again, to offer businesses as much certainty as possible, can the Conservatives follow our lead and also pledge here today to cap corporation tax at 25% for the next Parliament? Mr Deputy Speaker, these commitments to cap corporation tax, to maintain permanent full expensing, to keep the annual investment allowance, will all form part of the roadmap that we would publish in the first 6 months of a Labour government, setting out our tax plans for businesses for the whole of that Parliament. That would put stability, predictability and a long-term plan at the heart of our approach. And so finally, to give businesses as much certainty as possible, I would be grateful if the Minister could confirm whether a corporation tax cap at 25% and keeping full expensing in place will be in the Conservative Party manifesto too. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll move on to the second of our new clauses selected for debate today. Yes, I will.
I'm just interested in what the Shadow Minister was saying about what would happen in the case of other countries changing their corporation tax. As he will know, Mr Trump, former President President Trump, has said that he would cut the US corporation tax potentially 21% down to 15%. In those sorts of examples, would he anticipate the Labour government therefore look to cut the headline rate of corporation tax? Because that's quite a significant tax cut by the world's largest economy.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and as we've made clear, we would take action if tax changes in other advanced economies threaten to undermine UK competitiveness, but the headline commitment from us is to cap corporation tax at 25% for the duration of the next Parliament. And I recall in earlier consideration of this debate, he and I had an exchange about permanent full expensing, so I hope he'll welcome our commitment to maintaining permanent full expensing if we were in government, and perhaps put pressure on his frontbench colleagues to join us today in making this a cross-party commitment from this House. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, as I said, I was moving on to the second of our new clauses selected for debate today, new clause 7, which focuses on the multipliers used to calculate the higher rates of air passenger duty. As we have discussed at earlier stages of the consideration of this finance bill, Clause 24 makes no changes to Band A rates, whilst in Band B, the reduced, standard and higher rates will increase by £1, £3 and £7 respectively, and in Band C, those rates will increase by £1, £2 and £6 respectively. In each of those three bands, which cover international travel to a range of destinations, a simple principle is followed. That principle is that if the duty for passengers on economy flights go up, the duty for those flying business class and by private jets goes up too. In the domestic band, however, which covers flights within the UK, that simple principle of fairness does not apply. Instead, this bill means that for domestic UK flights, the reduced rate of air passenger duty rises by 50p, the standard rate by £1, and yet the higher rate is unchanged. Let me be clear what this means in plain English. From April the 1st this year, passengers flying economy and business class within the UK will see their taxes rise. Passengers taking exactly the same flights by private jets will enjoy a tax freeze. Now, although the changes kick in on April the 1st, this is no April Fool's Day joke, though the Prime Minister may be laughing. This is the result of a hidden loophole that the Conservatives have introduced. Now, we discussed this matter at the committee stage of this bill, and the Exchequer Secretary tried to provide an explanation for this unfairness. He said that air passenger duty rates are, and I quote, uprated by a forecast of RPI, and those rates are then rounded to the nearest pound. In terms of the different rates that I pointed to at committee stage, the Minister said, and I quote, it largely depends on how they, the rates, are rounded to the nearest pound. The actual rate is determined by whether the figure is rounded down or up. Now, I know the Exchequer Secretary is someone who always tries to give me a straight answer, and may I put on record I genuinely appreciate his efforts to do so. But I fear his explanation given at committee may have been unintentionally misleading, or at the very least only partial. Since committee stage, the House of Commons Library has given me information confirming that it does not tell the full picture to say that duty rates are, as the Minister claimed, uprated by a forecast of RBI, and those rates are then rounded to the nearest pound. In fact, my understanding is that the Minister's statement only applies to the reduced rates of air passenger duty. Those are indeed adjusted each year in line with forecast RPI and rounded to the nearest pound. However, the standard and higher rates are not calculated by separate reference to RPI, but rather are generally set as multipliers of the respective reduced rates. For instance, the standard and higher rates in Band B are set as 2.2 and 6.6 times the Band B reduced rate respectively, both in turn rounded to the nearest pound. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the use of multipliers within bands would at least mean that if the reduced rate went up in any particular band, the higher rate should go up too, and there would be a sense of fairness to the system. The problem is that this is not the case because there is a loophole that applies to the rates in the domestic band. The loophole means that the higher rate in the domestic band is not linked by way of multiplier to the reduced rate in that band, but rather is linked to the reduced rate in Band A and is equal to the higher rate in that band. Now, I realise some of these calculations are complex, Mr Deputy Speaker, and the terminology runs the risk of being confusing. So again, let me be clear what this means in plain English. For international flights, when the rate of duty for an economy class passengers goes up, the rate of duty for private jet passengers goes up too. If that had been true for domestic flights, then this year, the increase in the rate of duty for private jet passengers would be going up following the rise in the economy rate. However, the loophole means that this link does not exist. And so this year, duty is going up for passengers flying economy class within the UK and is frozen for those flying by private jet. Our new Clause 7 would require the government to consider and respond to options for closing this loophole. It would require the government to review the multipliers used to calculate air passenger duty rates and consider options for introducing a multiplier to link the higher and reduced rates within the domestic band. Taking that course of action would close the domestic flights loophole that will see private jet passengers benefit from a tax freeze this year, whilst everyone else flying economy and business class sees a tax rise. Mr Deputy Speaker, I very much hope the government will accept both our new clauses today. Our new clauses will make sure that ministers consider the loophole in air passenger duty that has given private jet passengers a tax freeze whilst everyone else is paying more, and they will consider what else is needed to make permanent full expensing as effective as possible. We believe the government must do all it can to provide a stable, predictable environment that encourages business investment and boosts economic growth. During this debate, I have set out our approach to providing that stability and predictability, including our commitments to cap corporation tax at 25% for the whole of the next Parliament if we win, and to maintain permanent full expensing. In the interest of giving businesses as much certainty as possible, I would urge the Minister to confirm whether the Conservatives will join us by going into the next general election with both these commitments from his party too.
Sir John Redwood.
I've declared my business interests in the register, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to support the government in its new Clause 5. I think it is good that the government is considering what more it can do to promote investment in United Kingdom generating capacity. We import far too much power already, especially when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And on the government's ambitious forecasts and targets for much more of our energy to be delivered by electricity, the position is going to get a lot worse quite quickly. So anything that the government can do to encourage that additional investment in generating plant is very welcome. We will also, of course, need a similar very positive approach to grid and cable, because the more you electrify, the more you will need to convey that power from the rather remote locations where much of it comes from to those parts of the country that are going to need it. So my only worry about this new clause is I'm not quite sure it goes far enough. I think it's helpful in this limited number of cases, but I trust that the Chancellor, when coming to the budget quite soon, on March the 6th, will consider that this is just a stepping stone here in this new clause, and that we need to review again the very large tax impositions upon energy of all kinds in this country now, with the double corporation tax in many cases and the range of windfall taxes that are called windfall but often aren't really windfall because they don't come off when the prices go down, although they get put on when the prices are going up. And I think that whole area needs considerable review because we do need to take it very seriously that we are short of energy overall. We are short of electricity generating capacity. We are short of the means to route power from generation to use. And this would be a very important stimulus for the British economy if we did produce more of our own energy, if we generated more of our own electricity, if we were thinking about having a surplus to export again instead of us all too often being cruelly reliant upon imports of liquid natural gas and, of course, of electricity, particularly from the continent. But I would also like to briefly refer to new clauses 4 and 6 on the order paper, because these are very wide-ranging clauses which invite the government to make assessments or reviews of features of this current legislation, but they wish to broaden it out so that they wish to get the government to review the impact of its general fiscal strategy on equalities, on investment, on the state of the corporate sector, and on inequalities in our society. Now, I'm quite sure the government will be reviewing all these things as a matter of course, and it is often a continuous process. Indeed, many of the items covered in this request for special review are already reported on and form part of the normal process of policy preparation, and quite rightly so. So if the government minister says to me he'd be grateful if I did not vote for these specific clauses in the bill, I have no problem with that. I'm not sure it helps to embody them in legislation anyway. I think it's a bit of an abuse of legislation, but I think the government does need to respond to the general thirst for knowledge that these clauses represent, and understand that there are some serious issues here which need returning to. I trust the Chancellor will return to them at the budget. I mean, if we look at the fiscal impact which these two clauses cover, I trust that in the preparation of the budget we will not only have analysis in the Treasury of these particular measures which are still going through from the last time, but I hope that the government will want to review the extraordinary losses of the Bank of England. I think they've run up to 34 billion already in the current financial year, and these are losses which the Treasury and therefore the taxpayer have to pay as they are incurred. I think it's completely unacceptable. I think it imposes strains upon the public accounts and upon the Treasury at a time when we really don't need them, when we need that money for other purposes. And there are two simple measures which the bank could take to stem the magnitude of those losses. It should not be selling bonds at a big loss in the market. The European Central Bank isn't doing this, although they have a very similar problem with a portfolio of very expensively acquired bonds. And there is also the issue of the running losses on these holdings, where the Bank of England is paying the full, much enhanced short-term interest rate following their increases in it, which now, of course, greatly exceeds the revenue on the bonds, because they paid far too much for the bonds and they have a very low rate of interest on it, and those running losses are a problem. Again, I think they should look at what the European Central Bank is doing, where they pay different interest rates on reserves held under this system, so they don't have such a large running loss. I give way.
I'm very grateful to my royal friend giving way, and I just wondered if he could just tell me if I got this right. Because in the commentary for up ahead of the budget, we talk about wiggle room and the OBR forecast and a 5 or 10 billion here, but I think what I was hearing my honourable friend say was completely out of the control of the Treasury bench and control of this Parliament, the Governor of the Bank of England can unilaterally decide that he will crystallise losses on whichever extent of bonds he wishes to, and then put that loss into the calculations of the Chancellor of the day, and the Chancellor of the day will then have to work around that in order to then work out what the fiscal expenditure, public expenditure, taxation can be right. Is that actually the case? Because that sounds mightily undemocratic to me.
Well, I think this is a very interesting point of debate, but my understanding of the constitutional position is it's not as bad as my honourable friend is suggesting, because, of course, all of the bonds were acquired with the express permission of the then Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think the Bank of England on its website says that the bond portfolio is held on behalf of the Treasury, and successive Chancellors of the Exchequer, beginning with the Labour Chancellor who first undertook quantitative easing and carried on by successive Conservative Chancellors, did of course all sign an agreement with the bank to say they would indemnify against loss. So I think given that the government and this Parliament empowered the purchase of the bonds and now takes responsibility for any losses on the bonds, it seems to me it's perfectly reasonable for there to be a proper conversation about whether you want to take the losses. And I see nothing wrong with us here challenging the idea that uniquely of the big quantitative easing programmes, it is the Bank of England which not only insists on selling them at big losses but gets reimbursed, whereas the ECB does not sell them in the market at big losses, and the Federal Reserve Board does sell them in the market at big losses but gets no money back. It's simply going to put on its balance sheet that it's lost a lot of money, and takes the view that as you're a central bank it doesn't really matter if you lose a lot of money, because of course central banks create money, so it's not like a normal commercial business. So I hope the ministers will look at this as part of this general assessment which is being invited by these new clauses. I hope also they will look at the expenditure items in the overall accounts covered by new clause 4, the public finances, because there has been a very marked decline in public sector productivity in the years 2020 to 2023, quite without precedent in my experience of following public finances over the years, as I have been doing. On this very sharp decline, I think it would be at least a £30 billion loss to our system, in that it costs at least £30 billion a year more now to run that group of public services covered by these figures than it did before the collapse in productivity. And then, of course, on top of that, there's been the need for much bigger sums to cover the inflation as well. This is not the inflation figure, this is the real loss figure from the productivity. Now, we're all very sympathetic to the difficulties the lockdown caused and the transition out of lockdown, and there was bound to be disruption, and public services were badly affected by that, as children couldn't go to school and hospitals were disrupted by COVID. But that's now some time behind us, and it does seem perplexing that we can't get those public services back to the 2019 levels of productivity. And I hear comment that maybe AI will do it and there needs to be a big investment in computers. Well, that should be on top, because all I'm saying to the government is surely we could get back to 2019 productivity levels using 2019 techniques, which is very much pre-artificial intelligence and before the latest run of computerization. So again, I think it's a very big area that needs to be looked at as part of any review of the public finances. And the third area, which is also very large and is very much in the news today, is that we discover that even more people in our country now do not feel they can go back to work and that they need help at home because they're no longer able to work. The government is working on some very important programs, as we know, through DWP, to show people that combination of part-time, flexible working at home with proper support and training and maybe additional financial support to help them, they could go back to work for some or part of the time and make a contribution. And I think we desperately need them. I think their lives would be more rewarding. They would be better off because we now have a benefit system where it's always better to work, and you will be better off. I think this should be cross-party because it's a problem that our nation as a whole faces. We can enrich their lives and we can then help to reduce the burden on the taxpayer and improve the net income of those concerned. And that, again, is many billions. So my point in making these three simple points apparent to the House is that there are very large sums of money indeed over bond losses and over productivity, which we need to review. Because that would help in the formation of the next budget. It would create more headroom, both for the tax cuts we need to promote growth and for the improved public service provision in the areas where the shoe is still pinching. And I trust that that will be part of any review that might emerge from these new clauses or from the spirit of the new clauses, and I hope it is something which my right honourable friend the Chancellor is thinking about, because we are going to have a budget hard on the heels of this finance bill out of the autumn statement. I welcome the idea that in these conditions of recovery and the need for faster growth, we're having more than one budget a year, and that we may have three fiscal events quite close to each other if all goes well. They must be promoting growth, they must be reducing taxes. This is a good start, and I welcome his particular new clause, but please can we have some more, and can we please look at the headroom that I think I've helped identify.
Yeah. Sorry, SNP spokesman Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm sure those people who are suffering through the cost of living crisis that's rampant across the nations of the UK would have hoped that if the government were bringing a new clause today, it would be one to address the struggles that they have paying their rents, paying their ever-increasing mortgages, paying their now higher, thanks to Brexit, food bills, and indeed struggling to pay even higher energy bills when the cap was adjusted in January. The government have only brought new Clause 5, and as I referenced in the Ways and Means discussion, this has come to us today without any opportunity to amend it. Now, the electricity generator levy disproportionately impacts Scotland's renewable sector. The SNP do welcome the fact that this amendment would mean that new renewable projects are exempt from the EGL. But as noted by the Chief Executive of Scottish Renewables, though the new measures like the EGL exemption introduced in the autumn statement are there, they are not enough She also noted that we urgently need consistent policies to provide an environment which will enable businesses to invest at the scale needed right now. For example, a pledge for £28 billion a year to invest in the green energy transition might be a good thing, but of course that seems to be off the table not only from the UK government but from the...
Ask the honourable member just to give way. I wish to make a short statement. I know the whole House will wish to join me in expressing our sympathies with His Majesty the King following the news announcement this evening. Our thoughts are, of course, with His Majesty and his family, and with all wish to send him our very best wishes for the successful treatment and a speedy recovery following tonight's news. Sorry for the interruption. Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and obviously entirely appropriate for me to pause for you to give that statement. Obviously, I'm unaware of the news that's been brought to the Chamber and the detail of it, but clearly there is something significant there, and thoughts go with family members at this time with it. As I was saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are a need for consistent policies to help the renewables sector, and we're just not seeing it either from the Tory government, which has run out of ideas on that, or indeed the Labour Party, who seem to promise and then switch, and dump those responsibilities for what is required. Now, one of the things that we would have liked to have seen in this new clause is perhaps some fleshing out of the Chancellor's promise in the autumn statement, when he said that he would be providing up to £1,000 per year off electricity bills for up to 10 years for those people living along or nearby new generation equipment. We've not heard of that today, so we don't know what schemes coming up. And of course, as I intimated earlier, I would have liked to introduce an amendment to say, if that's applicable for people living next to new generation equipment, what about those people who are already living amongst it? For example, in the Highlands and Islands, we have the coldest climate in the UK. We have most people off the gas grid, so we have higher than average bills than the rest of the nations of the UK. We pay the highest standing charge for electricity, 40% more than here in London. And of course we have, because of those policies from the UK government, the highest level of fuel poverty in the UK, yet we export 6 times the amount of electricity that we use in the Highlands. So it would have been entirely appropriate for the Minister to agree to introduce a Highland energy rebate to put back some of that contribution into the pockets of those people across the Highlands and Islands who are struggling because of those conditions. But of course, we do... Yes, I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He's making a very good point, which rings very true in my constituency as well. Of course, the problem is made more difficult still because of other costs that people living in our constituencies face. For instance, delivery charges, the cost of other services, and even the cost of something like a tube of toothpaste can be that little bit higher the further it is away from the big urban centres. So that makes the problem a lot worse. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for that contribution, and of course he's absolutely right, and I welcome his support for the campaign that I'm trying to get going to get this justice for people across the Highlands and Islands just now. He mentions other costs. Of course, living in rural locations means that quite often those properties are larger, less insulated, and it doesn't mean people have got more money. It just means because properties were built that way over the centuries and decades, so they have higher costs like that as well. So there are many, many factors that are affecting people across the Highlands and Islands that could be mitigated by a Highland energy rebate, such as the one I'm suggesting. Mr Speaker, new clause 4 on the paper from the honourable members for Oldham East and Saddleworth would have required the Chancellor to review the public health inequality and poverty effects of the provisions of this Act and to publish a report on this within 6 months of the bill being passed. I think it's an issue of regret that looks as though it's not going to be put forward tonight, but the SNP would have supported it and actually believe that this this requirement to consider the implications of the bill on equality, poverty and health should be put in place for every relevant bill in this place, because as I've referred to, people are suffering from a cost of living crisis that's been fuelled by decisions made in this Parliament. As I referred to, their mortgages are going up quite directly as a result of some of the issues of the mini-budget that we saw, the disastrous mini-budget. We're now seeing food costs going up, and of course there's more to come with that as the Brexit regulations kick in at the end of April. We'll see prices not only going up now, but rising even higher after May, and as the businesses across the UK face more red tape. And of course we're already seeing higher than ever energy bills with it, as I've referred to. Meanwhile, in Scotland, we're doing what we can with our limited powers. We already have lower council tax, and of course we're putting in place the council tax freeze. And a poll out today shows that nearly 70% of the public approve of that policy. Coming to new clause 6, the new clause would require the Chancellor to publish an assessment of the impact on investment of growth of the measures in this Act to make full expensing permanent and to consider what other policies could support the effectiveness of permanent full expensing. Now, given, Mr Deputy Speaker, that full expensing is expected to cost £1 to £3 billion a year after an initial £10 billion a year for the first 3 years of the policy being in place, that deserves some scrutiny. Now, the SNP, as I've made clear since it was announced in the autumn statement, supports full expensing being made permanent, as this gives business greater certainty and simplifies the tax system. It is vital, though, and I return to this theme, Mr Deputy Speaker, about getting the information to members in this place so that we can be fully informed on this, that this Parliament is able to assess the effectiveness of this policy and whether or not it is encouraging investment in certain assets like plant and machinery as it's designed to do, or is that indeed at the expense of other forms of investment. As I say, full expensing is a rare point in this autumn statement to agree on, but you know, it goes without saying, and I've made it, well, I will say it again because I've said it time and time again, and I'll finish on this, that this bill has failed people. It's failed people struggling through a cost of living crisis. They want to know what help they are going to get now while they are struggling, while they see their household expenses going through the roof. They want to see green energy investment. They want to see that investment in the just transition from oil and gas, which we'll need for a period of time, but we should be safeguarding that. At the moment, the United States are investing hundreds of billions of dollars initially in supporting new green technologies such as hydrogen. We've seen the EU make similar high-level investments, and yet the UK government and the Labour Party are dawdling on this issue, whilst again we waste an opportunity to lead across the world. Like so many bills, it ignores the needs of the people of Scotland. And it's little wonder, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the people of Scotland are on the inevitable path to independence.
May I just take this opportunity to associate myself... Order. May I just take this opportunity to associate myself with Mr Speaker's remarks? I'm sure that all our thoughts are with King Charles and with the royal family this evening. Anthony Mangnall.
Say myself with your remarks and the Speaker's, and wish His Majesty a speedy recovery. It's an interesting debate to take part in, and it's always rather disappointing to hear Labour describe itself as the party of pro-business, given the fact that they go on to ask businesses to make increases in wages, recognising unions, accepting collective bargaining, restricting labour flexibility, increasing bureaucracy and telling businesses where to invest. That, to me, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a wolf in sheep's clothing if I've ever heard it. But I would like to speak just on a couple of points around the finance bill and to the amendments that have been tabled. It's extraordinary to hear the opposition, both front benches, talk about expensing becoming permanent. Well, that is exactly what this bill is intending to do, and the minute we get royal assent, it is going to be permanent. The Minister said in the second reading that it would be permanent, and as soon as that comes forward, it will be in place and on the statute books. But of course it is welcome, and Amendments 1 and 2 make a point around full expensing, and of course ensuring that UK's plant and machinery capital allowances will increase, a tax cut of somewhere in the region of about £10 billion a year, helping to drive up growth across the whole of the United Kingdom, specifically in our manufacturing sectors. And I can say that from my point of view in South Devon, this is a tax cut worth having, one that will help drive growth, attract investment and innovation right across the United Kingdom, not just in those industrial heartlands that we so often speak about. We speak a great deal about research and development, and there's often international comparisons, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but I have to say once again, Amendment 3 offers the opportunity for us to drive innovation and economic growth. The simplification of this by merging the Research and Development Expenditure Credit Scheme and the Small and Medium Enterprise Scheme is doing that rare thing that we so often fail to do in government, which is simplify the tax code and provide greater support for UK firms, something we should all be welcoming. Just around amendments for research and development and support for loss-making intensive SMEs, the reduction by 10% from 40 to 30%. It's worth just stating the impact that will have on SMEs. It's expected to help 5,000 further SMEs, and for every £27 per £100 of qualifying research and development invested. That is an extraordinary level of support, somewhere in the region of about £280 million a year by 28-29. Something to be welcomed by small businesses right across the country. There's also, of course, the extension of the sunset clauses for 2 more programmes, the Enterprise Investment Scheme and the Venture Capital Trust, and their extension to April 2035 is welcome. But I would just like to make a specific point around clauses 4 and 5 and the support for the creative sector. It is one of those unsung success stories about how well the UK creative industry has done because of this government's extraordinary tax cut that has helped TV, film and music and video games thrive in this country. Between 2010 and 2019, the 1.5 times increase in terms of its growth is extraordinary, creating thousands of jobs across this country, attracting millions, if not billions of pounds of investment and spurring on growth. If I may, that sets the benchmark for what we need to do as a government, to help create industries by reducing the tax burden, by ensuring that we can find ways in which we can support not just the creative industries, but all industries. And I might just make a plug at this point for the tourism and hospitality sector. The Minister knows I mention this often, but there is a chance, I hope in future, that what we've done for the creative industry, we might also be able to do for the tourism and hospitality sector with a VAT reduction. I welcome the amendments that the government's put forward. Of course, they have my support on this, and I welcome the intent of a finance bill that is helping work pay, is ensuring that the tax burden is going down for businesses, and that is creating the landscape that will attract the investment and opportunities that we so desperately need in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Before I start, I'd just like to express on behalf of myself, my Liberal Democrat colleagues, our sympathies to the King and to his family, and of course our hopes that his treatment should prove to be successful. I'll be speaking to Amendments 1, 2 and 3 in addition to New Clause 5 today. I'd like to reiterate the Liberal Democrats are not supportive of this bill. It's a deception from the government after years of cruel tax hikes on hard-working families. This legislation maintains the government's unfair tax rises on working families through the freezing of income tax thresholds, fails to invest properly in our public services such as the NHS, and takes none of the vital steps needed to grow the UK economy. Some of the measures in the bill have worthy aims, but this context is important from the outset. I firstly wish to speak to Amendments 1, 2 and 3, which make further changes to the new R&D regime defined in the bill. While these changes may themselves be necessary and sensible clarifications, it should be noted that just last week, colleagues in the other place, sitting on the Economic Affairs Select Committee, reported their concern that the number of significant R&D changes made in the last 5 years has led to a perception of instability in the UK's R&D tax relief regime and undermined the intended incentive effect of the relief. What businesses need more than anything is certainty and stability. The government's chopping and changing on R&D is indicative of a wider failure to create a stable and settled environment in which businesses can flourish. Perhaps the clearest example of this has been the scrapping of the UK's industrial strategy and the disbanding of the independent body overseeing it. This short-sighted step has robbed businesses of the stability that they need to grow. The constant changes to the R&D relief regime are a clear example of how that lack of foresight and stability can undermine the aim of economic growth. So once again, I urge the government, even at this late stage, to relaunch an industrial strategy. A proper industrial strategy can create the conditions for sustainable growth, including through effective and clear incentives for R&D investment, especially amongst SMEs, and ensure that the UK's regulatory R&D and tax frameworks are geared towards fostering innovation. I'd also like to speak to new Clause 5, which introduced an exemption to the energy generator levy for new plant investments. The Liberal Democrats believe that while this may help to strengthen investment in renewable energy and contribute towards our net zero targets, the government's own assessment of the measure notes that it is unlikely to affect the retail price of electricity for households as energy prices remain tied to gas prices. The fact remains, therefore, that this bill and the autumn statement from which it arose does nothing to help families with soaring energy prices or to put a proper windfall tax on the oil and gas giants. The government continues to sit on its hands as businesses and families struggle with energy price inflation. A windfall tax on the super profits of oil and gas producers could raise significant revenue, which could have paid for a targeted package of support for those worst affected by the energy crisis by doubling the warm home discount and investing in an emergency home insulation scheme. It remains clear that November's autumn statement and this finance bill both represent a missed opportunity to address the crisis in energy prices. To conclude, while the Liberal Democrats are supportive of certain measures within the bill, such as the extension of full expensing, we cannot support any legislation that arises from such a deceptive and unjust autumn statement. Ultimately, British households are seeing the biggest fall in living standards since the 1950s, and households across the country are crying out for real support from this government for action on the cost of living crisis and investment in our NHS. But all we've heard is more stale announcements from a Conservative government that is completely out of touch. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I first of all concur with the comments made by others in relation to King Charles. On behalf of the Democratic Unionist Party, myself and his loyal subjects in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, especially Northern Ireland, I do, and Mr Deputy Speaker, I know you do as well, and probably others in this chamber, pray for King Charles and for the royal family. King Charles for a speedy recovery for his health. I pray, as we all pray, to the great healer omnipotent over all, that his family will know the peace of God as they support him at this time. Can I thank all of those who have contributed to this bill, and to you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for giving me the chance to participate. Much of this bill focuses on the measures that are needed to deliver the autumn statement, and this is understandable. I look very much, I welcome and respect the Minister, and he knows that in this chamber. I look forward to his responses at the end. For every rightful public sector pay rise that is rightly awarded, the converse is that money must be raised, and therefore the principle of this bill is one that we all support in theory. However, in practice, not many of us want to sign off on the bill that ups taxes for those who are struggling as things are at present. Obviously, prices have risen, obligations have risen correspondingly, but for us in Northern Ireland, we have been seeking a complete removal of the air passenger duty as a way of enhancing connectivity and attractivity as well to international business investment, and subsequently to see the raise in APD in line with APD is disappointing. Of course, I know that the Minister's response will be, as we're all aware, of the renewal of Stormont. It means that we can look at this ourselves. However, the renewal of the Assembly has also highlighted the issue of allocation of finances, and it is clear that an overhaul is needed of the funding formulas for Northern Ireland to meet the need in the long-term sustained terms. Just this morning on the TV back home, and also on the radio this morning before I left the office to come here, I heard the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland commented on it and saying that he had hoped that a new funding formula would be found for Northern Ireland. We in the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee have also put forward that theory as well, and have asked for that. It's been a joint political matter, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's been the Honourable Lady for Belfast South, the Honourable Gentleman for North Down, that's 3 of the political parties in Northern Ireland, and others from the Labour Party, and some with some concerns from within the Conservative Party, pushing to have a Barnett formula would be similar to the Welsh system. If it comes into place, then we in Northern Ireland would benefit, and it would only be fair and equitable that would be the case, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we would do that. So I want to highlight that because it means if we were wishing to do in the Northern Ireland Assembly as a party, or the cross-party were doing something with the air passenger duty that refers to in the bill we have here tonight, then we would need to have that formula in place, which would make that happen. As I said, we're looking for a fair and equitable funding for the future. The £3.3 billion of money made available now is money that many of my constituents believe to be withheld, but that is welcomed. And being positive and ever mindful of the positivity that came out of the debate last week, let's be positive in looking forward.
The honourable gentleman understands that he's caught my eye and I've caught his. Could I gently remind him that we're talking about the government new clauses and amendments at the moment? There is a third reading debate ahead in which more measures can be raised if necessary. But would he, at the moment, please concentrate on the matter in hand?
I knew when you looked at me, Mr Deputy Speaker, you were telling me to get back on the subject matter, so I actually was about to do so, and I thank you for that very kind reminder, by the way, for me to do that in a very, very nice way. It is appreciated. I did refer to new clause 7 in the APD, and I wish to the Mayor just quickly refer to that. When I look through a number of these issues addressed through the bill, I can see a very clear and obvious theme. Air passenger duty to rise in line with RPI, plastic packaging to rise in line with CPI, aggregate levy in line with RPI, tobacco levy RPI plus 2%, vehicle excise duty for cars, vans and motorbikes RPI, and so it continues, and to be honest, it seems to be understandable. However, what is clear again in the finance bill that we have before us tonight is whilst all things all rise with RPI or CPI, and we understand the system and how that works, government has again chosen not to look towards the working middle class. I wish to make this point. I've done it at every finance debate, Mr Deputy Speaker. I've done it every opportunity comes through, and I'm seeking the support from the Minister. The Minister, and indeed I've asked the Minister a number of occasions about this, and he knows the issue. It's about the middle class families, those who need that help, that extra bit of help. They're paying their tax, but the threshold which we find themselves in the position is the 40,000 a year, and also the 50,000 threshold is not helpful. So if we wish to really help and address the issues of new clause 6, where we have the impact of permanent full expensing, if we want to address the issue of air passenger duty, the things that the people want, then we also have to address that issue as well. So I ask the Minister very kindly and very gently, when it comes to the issue of how we help our squeezed middle class, not those who the wealthy, but the squeezed middle class, can the Minister quite very kindly look at the threshold? Because I believe if that threshold is changed, then those who, I'd ask the Minister for a director's not to talk about the higher income benefit charge or any other mitigation, help us to understand why those who pay into the tax system and maybe not get as much as they should, and when they're struggling in a way that families back in 2013 could have imagined. Government knows it to be the case. I think the Minister knows it to be the case. So when it comes to a bill that helps us represent all of the people of this great United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that the bill tonight will be one that does just that. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And may I join you, Mr Speaker, the whole House and everybody in wishing His Majesty a speedy recovery following the announcement this evening. And I would like to thank members and honourable members for contributing towards this debate. And I'll respond to many of the points raised and also talk to the amendments that have been moved. Regarding new clause 1, I agree that we must prevent fraud and ensure that all taxpayers pay their fair share. And to help achieve this, the new maximum sentences for the most egregious examples of tax fraud, the new criminal offence on the promoters of tax avoidance, and enhanced director disqualification powers will come into force on royal assent with this bill. That will all help. The UK's tax gap, of course, is at the joint lowest rate ever recorded at 4.8% of total liabilities and has remained low and stable. The UK's tax gap compares favourably as well with our international partners. HMRC already published performance updates that provide information on HMRC's compliance performance every quarter. Therefore, we believe that this new clause is not necessary. Regarding new clause 2, it's pretty much the same as the new clause 1 that the House rejected at the committee of the whole House. And as I've said before, we believe this is unnecessary as the information has been published in the TINs, the tax impact and information notes, alongside each policy change. And these give a clear explanation of the policy objective together with details of the implementation costs for both HMRC and businesses. Regarding new clause 3, that would require the government to publish details of sentences given and stop notices issued to tackle evasion and avoidance in the last 5 years, as well as revenue expected generated by measures contained in this finance bill to tackle evasion and avoidance in each of the next 5 years. But HMRC publishes information on the number of custodial sentences received for tax compliance offences and the average sentence length in their annual reports and accounts. The 2023-24 annual report and accounts will be published this summer, providing a full overview of HMRC's performance. The government also publishes a list of tax avoidance schemes subject to a stop notice on gov.uk, with the most recent report published on the 7th of December. HMRC has issued more than 20 stop notices since issuing the first one in 2022. The government also published revenue estimates for the next 5 years of the clauses in this bill in the TINs. And therefore, as the information requested by News Clause 3 is publicly available in routine HMRC publications, the publication requested by New Clause 3 is unnecessary. Mr. Deputy Speaker, new clause 4 would require the government to report on the likely impact of the measures of this bill on public health, inequality and poverty, matters that concern us all and that we debated and discussed as well at committee stage. However, existing mechanisms already effectively monitor and assess government policies in these areas, rendering the proposed amendment redundant. Departments such as the Department of Health and Social Care and its arm's length bodies diligently evaluate policies to enhance health up and down the country. And through the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities and the National Institute of Health Research, they address health inequalities and provide robust evidence for policy development. Various government units, such as the Cabinet Office Equalities Hub, contribute to levelling up opportunities and ensuring fairness. The Government Equalities Office, Race Disparity Unit, Disability Unit and Social Mobility Commission all focus on different equality dimensions to guide and support inclusive policy development across the country. So again, therefore, we do not believe News Clause 4 is necessary. Regarding new clause 6, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I agree that it's important to regularly review and evaluate policy and be transparent. I know something that the Honourable Member for Wokingham also highlighted. HMRC has published a tax information and impact note setting out the impacts of the measure, including the economic impacts. And the OBR has already conducted and published extensive analysis on the investment and growth impacts of full expensing. That's available in their economic and fiscal outlook from November 2023. And this therefore negates the need to publish a separate assessment in 6 months' time. The impact of permanent full expensing will be monitored through information collected from tax returns and through regular communication with businesses and representative bodies. Regarding new clause 7, this would require publication of a review of the multipliers used to calculate the higher rates of air passenger duty which apply to larger private jets. And I appreciate that there is some challenges here in understanding these. I can assure my opposite number that there's no intent to mislead or indeed give accurate information to the House. Tables are available. I will provide the honourable gentleman with a table, because the point is that the government does review annually the rates of taxes and reliefs, including APD, to ensure that they are appropriate and reflect the current state of the economy. And as has been the usual practice since APD was introduced in 1994, rates are announced over 12 months in advance to provide airlines with sufficient notice. I think some of the challenge with the calculations and the whole point about rounding to the pound has come across because in April 2023 we cut APD on domestic flights by 50%. But the rate for private jets was not cut and therefore remained equal to that on short-haul international flights. And this bill provides for the uprating of APD rates by forecast RPI in 2024-25, rounded to the nearest pound, and then, of course, multipliers around. So some of this is the sheer mathematics of making sure that we don't have disparities. And the current APD rates ensure that passengers in private jets therefore pay significantly more tax than passengers in commercial flights. For example, in 2024-25, the higher rate for domestic private jet passengers will be more than 10 times the economy rate. Since the government keeps all rates, including all APD rates, under regular review, new Clause 7 is unnecessary. And of course, I note as well the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford's appeal, which I've heard before. In terms of a few other comments, my right honourable friend for Wokingham, sure, certainly.
My request was, Minister, I'm particularly fond of you, and you know that, but you've heard my request before, so my request to the Minister now is, action. Minister, let's have action.
We always try and act. I can't do everything, though. But I note the Honourable Gentleman's comments, and indeed, actually, in a similar vein, the Honourable Gentleman for Totnes raised the importance more broadly of the tourism, hospitality and leisure sector, and, of course, the importance of the creative sector, and he's absolutely right, and therefore measures in this bill and in other areas will support all of those. Of course, the business rates relief is vital to the tourism, retail, hospitality and leisure sector. The Honourable Gentleman, the Right Honourable Gentleman for Wokingham raised a range of comments, some outside of my direct remit, but I will assure him that I will raise the points he raised across a whole range of areas, including bonds and, of course, public sector efficiency, a vitally important area, with my colleagues at the department. And in terms of a few other comments as well, briefly, Mr Deputy Speaker, I was somewhat entertained by the comments by my opposite number on the Labour benches, who was effectively asking me to commit to Conservative Party policies as enthusiastically as he does, which is quite a turnout for the books. Of course, the policies we have announced, we welcome their support for them. But let's be under no doubt, there is clear blue water between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in terms of principles, in terms of the size and scale of government, the level of taxation. And of course, we've seen with their flip-flopping over 28 billion, I'm not sure what the policy is today, it's quite remarkable that he was rather rich to ask for commitments from me, given the flip-flopping that is so prevalent in every area of their policy. Because I do not know. At one point, the Labour Party was supportive of Brexit. Now, I don't know, are they against it? Were they supportive of the member for Islington North being Prime Minister? Or do they not want him in the party? Are they in favour of nationalisation? Or are they against it? Are they in favour of private sector involvement in the NHS? Or are they against it? There's a whole host of policy areas where we have seen persistent, perennial flip-flopping from the opposition. I literally have goldfish whose commitments I would trust more than the Labour opposition front bench. So on those points, I'm afraid we're just going to respectfully agree to disagree. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, as I've said, new Clause 5 and the 6 amendments that the government have proposed help to ensure that the changes that this bill apply as intended and deliver a vital policy to protect renewable investment. They will make the tax environment more easily understood by business and protect vital tax revenue used to fund our public services. I therefore urge that they stand part of the bill, whereas the 6 new clauses proposed by the opposition seek to get the government to publish data and information that is already being published through other sources, as I have outlined. I therefore urge the House to reject those amendments.
The question is that new clause 5 be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question is that new clause 5 be added to the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. New clause 6 has been selected for separate decision. James Murray to move new clause 6 formally.
I move formally.
New clause 6. Assessment of the impact of permanent full expensing.
The question is that new clause 6 be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. No. Division. Clear the lobbies. That new clause 6 be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. No. Tell us for the ayes Christian Wakeford, Kim Leadbeater. Tell us for the noes Gagan Mahindra and Suzanne Webb. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 185. The noes to the left, 285.
Thank you. The ayes to the right were 185. The noes to the left were 285. So the noes have it. Unlocked. New clause 7 has been selected for a separate decision. James Murray to move new clause 7 formally.
I move formally. New clause 7. Review of multipliers used to calculate higher rates of air passenger duty.
Question is that new clause 7 be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobbies. Question is that new clause 7 be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes. Christian Wakeford, Kim Leadbeater. Tell us for the noes. Gagan Mahindra and Suzanne Webb.
Order. Order.
Ayes to the right, 182. The noes to the left, 289.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 182. The noes to the left, 289. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. With the leave of the House, I call the Minister to move Government Amendments 1 to 6 formally.
Formally.
The question is that Government Amendments 1 to 6 be made. Does many of that say aye? Aye. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Consideration completed. Third reading. No. I call the Minister to move third reading. Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that the bill be read a third time. This is a government that is backing British business, supporting employment and creating a simpler and fairer tax system. At the autumn statement, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, delivered a statement with a clear intention to strengthen the economy for now and for the future. This finance bill, which members of the House have had the opportunity to scrutinise and debate over the last few months, does exactly that. It takes forward important tax measures to help businesses invest for less. It encourages innovation and supports our creative industries by elevating rates and simplifying credits. And it improves and simplifies our tax system to ensure it remains fit for purpose. Mr. Deputy Speaker, allow me to remind members of the bill's key aims. Our first aim is to support British industry so that we can solidify our position as world leaders in key sectors. The changes made to full expensing and the decision to make this permanent allow UK businesses to invest for less. These moves make the UK's plant and machinery capital allowances the most generous of any major economy. Permanent full expensing has been called the single most transformational thing we could do for investment and was welcomed by more than 200 companies and trade associations. The bill also merges two significant government schemes, the SME scheme and the R&D expenditure scheme. And in doing so, we are meeting our aim of simplifying the system while providing greater support to British businesses so that they can spend less time on administration and more time on innovation. This bill also introduces greater support for loss-making R&D intensive SMEs and lowers the intensity threshold required to access this to 30%, helping around 5,000 extra SMEs. To further support investment in renewable energy, we have introduced a new assets exemption for the electricity generator levy, and this measure will continue to drive growth in both our renewable sector and the wider economy. We also are continuing to support our world-leading creative industries with tax measures that reform the film, TV and video games tax reliefs, turning them into refundable expenditure credits, which makes it easier for business. Our second aim is supporting employment. We must remove barriers to work and incentives to not work. And most of all, must ensure hard work and expertise are rewarded. This is why the bill makes changes to encourage people to stay in work and to utilise their expertise for longer. The bill will complete the abolition of the lifetime allowance, amending pension tax rules so that employees with valuable, hard-earned expertise are no longer encouraged to reduce their hours or retire early. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimates that this will retain 15,000 workers annually, keeping many high-skilled employees and experienced individuals in our labour market, while ensuring they receive their rightful benefits for working. Our third aim, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is to create a simpler, fairer and more modern tax system, which again this bill supports. Making full expensing permanent is a huge simplification for larger firms, but we are a nation of millions of small businesses. In this bill, we are expanding the cash basis, a simplified way for over 4 million smaller and growing traders to use a simpler method to calculate their profits and pay their income tax. And while we remain focused on reducing the tax burden, we cannot understate the role of tax in supporting public services, and so we must all do our part. Everyone must pay their fair share. And that is why this bill is also introducing a new criminal offence for those who promote tax avoidance schemes and who continue to promote them after receiving a stop notice. Alongside this, for the first time, HMRC will be able to bring disqualification action against the directors of companies involved in promoting tax avoidance, and this includes those who control or exercise influence over a company. These are vital steps in ensuring the system is fair for all and that those who try to undermine it will face the consequences. Mr Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank honourable and right honourable members from across the House for their helpful and insightful contributions to the debates during this bill's passage. I would also like to thank the many stakeholders who have provided their views on the issues raised and the Treasury and HMRC officials and House clerks who have supported getting the bill to this point. This bill backs British business, rewards hard work, nurtures innovation and supports our leading industries while solidifying long-term economic growth, and for these reasons I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. James Murray.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I would like to begin by wishing His Majesty the King the very best for a speedy recovery. My colleagues and I are thinking of His Majesty and the royal family at this time, and we wish him a swift return to full health. Mr Deputy Speaker, in the opposition, we have made clear throughout the consideration of this bill that there are a number of individual measures it contains that we have been calling for some time. We welcome, for instance, the government finally making full expensing permanent after so many years of chopping and changing capital allowances, and we have made clear that we will maintain that if we win power this year. We have also made clear that we would maintain the system of R&D tax credits introduced by this bill, again after so many years of this government chopping and changing the design of the scheme. In both cases, we prize stability and predictability for businesses, because that is what businesses have made clear to us they value so greatly. We know that providing certainty is a critical factor in boosting business investment and economic growth. If we won the next general election in government, we would put that certainty and stability at the heart of our approach by publishing a roadmap in the first 6 months, setting out our business tax plans for the whole Parliament. We have set out our approach to full expensing and to corporation tax, and so I'm disappointed that the Treasury Minister was not able to give us a clear guarantee that the Conservatives will maintain full permanent expensing and cap corporation tax at 25% for the whole of the next Parliament. Businesses can have confidence, however, that both those commitments are locked in with Labour. Of course, there were some points in this bill that we have been critical of, not least the fact that it freezes tax for passengers flying around the UK on private jets, whilst at the same time hiking taxes for everyone else flying economy or business class. And it has also become clear that the government itself admits that some of the provisions in this bill will need to be returned to and corrected, a far from ideal position to be in before a bill has even become law. We know this is the case since toward the end of last month, HMRC admitted that the way in which the government has legislated to remove the lifetime allowance has, and I quote, created unintended consequences for members with multiple pension schemes. HMRC are saying that further legislation will be necessary to fix 3 areas within Schedule 9 of this finance bill relating to the abolition of the lifetime allowance, something that clearly indicates rushed legislation that runs the risk of creating problems for all involved. Legal firm Wedlake Bell, for instance, has said, and I quote, the proposed new tax regime replacing the LTA at breakneck speed from the 6th of April 2026 is very risky for all parties, including trustees, administrators, members, and indeed HMRC itself. More widely, though, Mr Deputy Speaker, our concern with this bill, as with the autumn statement that it followed, is that the Conservatives cannot hide or move on from their 14 years of economic failure. Those 14 years of failure have left economic growth languishing and people across Britain worse off. Last November's autumn statement for growth was the 11th attempt at an economic growth plan we have seen from the Conservatives. The truth is that the Conservatives are incapable of getting our country back on track. We need a general election so that Labour can offer the change and the plan that families and businesses across Britain need.
Harry Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I won't detain the House for long because I have a feeling that all my colleagues here are perhaps not here to hear my remarks. But I do want to make a couple of points, if I may, Mr Deputy Speaker. First of all, that after hearing the opposition complain about the measures in this finance bill, you'd think that they actually didn't like them, whereas they're not here this evening. They're not going to be voting against third reading, and they haven't put down any solid proposals themselves. And the only economic policy that anyone has heard from the benches opposite is the extra £28 billion that they want to impose in taxes on our businesses and our families.
Agree with me, it's almost like they don't have a plan.
I would agree with her, and I would also like to point out that of the 110 pro-growth, pro-supply side measures in this finance bill, the pro-growth measures are ones which have not stoked inflation. Indeed, inflation has fallen from over 11% down to 4% and is on track, according to the Bank of England's forecast, to reach 2%. And so I think one has to commend the measures that have been taken in this finance bill, for which I look forward to voting for shortly, for that progress. I do want to also add my thanks to the officials from the Treasury and from HMRC who've had to work so hard on this particular piece of legislation, only to hear that in a month's time there's going to have another budget and another finance bill. And so one does have to recognise the hard work that's gone into that. But also, I do worry about HMRC. I do worry that they're being asked to do more and more. I do worry about the fact that the various thresholds that are frozen, particularly, as the Minister knows, the high-income, high-benefit child benefit charge is actually affecting more and more taxpayers and more people up and down the land. And so one of the things that I'm worried about in the HMRC's bailiwick is around one of the 110 measures, which was that you can start putting in your ISA fractional shares. And this was a very welcome announcement in last autumn's statement. I tried to put down an amendment to this bill about it, but it wasn't found to be orderly because it's actually not something which has been legislated for this time around. In fact, the word is that HMRC are not going to be able to get to do it until at least the next tax year. And could I ask, therefore, the Financial Secretary to convey that sense of urgency that I think we all want to see in terms of making these pro-growth, pro-investment changes. So there's a wide range of measures, Mr Deputy Speaker, that I welcome in this finance bill. I look forward to the budget on the 6th of March, and I think we can pay tribute to all the hard work that the Financial Secretary, his team, and all of the Treasury and HMRC officials have put into this excellent piece of legislation.
Through Hendry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In this third reading of what is a finance bill, one thing has been conspicuously absent from the front bench's speeches today on both sides of the Tories and the Labour Party, and that's the one thing that is affecting people most just now, the struggle they have with the cost of living crisis. People are struggling to pay their bills. They're struggling to pay their mortgages, which have gone up because of this government's disastrous mini-budget. They're struggling to pay their rents. They're struggling to pay for food bills because of these parties' disastrous Brexit, which is pushing food price inflation even higher. They're struggling to pay their energy bills because this government has been asleep at the wheels while those prices have been rising, even allowing the energy price cap to go up in January, when bills have never been higher, Mr Speaker. This is a travesty of a finance bill. It has done nothing to help the people of Scotland with their finances. It has done nothing to help people across the rest of the UK, and it's something I'll definitely be voting against tonight.
Abrahams.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And could I ask colleagues on all sides of the House for some indulgence. Unfortunately, I was missed off in terms of report stage. And I wanted very much to speak about a clause that I tabled, new clause 4, which is very close to my heart. It's the reason I became an MP, and it's specifically about looking at asking the government to do an assessment on the public health effects of the bill, particularly in terms of regional inequalities, in terms of the impacts on protected characteristics, and also in terms of the impact on the NHS. Before I start, though, if I may also associate with my remarks with my colleague from the front bench in relation to His Majesty King Charles, and wish him a very speedy recovery and best wishes to his family as well. So I had hoped that I might convince just a little bit more the Minister than I did at Bill Committee stage in terms of what this assessment, my new clause, would, what a difference it would make. So I'm going to extend on the arguments just a little bit more, if he could bear with me. And also, appreciate I can't do anything about this bill at the moment, but perhaps he can think about it for the one that we'll have after the budget as well, because I will be coming back again with this. So it's not about changing anything in the finance bill, it's about publishing the government's evaluation of the impact of their policies as announced in their autumn statement on the health of our constituents, as mediated through, for example, changes in poverty and socioeconomic inequalities. Ideally, this would have been done during planning of the autumn statement, but given this hasn't happened, again, my new clause would have provided the opportunity for them to make decisions based on the information they had from this evaluation on the impacts this would have on our health, including our children's health. Many of you will have heard and read the Academy of Medical Sciences report on child health that came out earlier today, where the UK has been revealed to have a stalling infant mortality rate which is worse than 60% of similar countries. Now, this is after a century where infant mortality has actually been decreasing. The Academy has put to us as decision makers that we need to be doing a lot better than this. So my new clause would have helped also the government in terms of his quest for transparency, fulfilling his promise around this, but also to restore confidence in the government and politics more widely. It would also have allowed the government to monitor its commitment towards levelling up across the country and our health, and to tackle the appalling north-south divide. Now, I was a Director of Health Research, Public Health Research at the University of Liverpool, along with Dame Professor Margaret Whitehead, who in 1987 published her report revealing for the first time the north-south health divide. It came out a few years after the Black Report, and it really showed the relationship, the causal relationship between poverty and also the impact on health. But Margaret took it a step further, emphasising the socioeconomic inequalities, not just poverty, as the key driver of these health inequalities. And we've been building on this evidence base for the last 40 years or so. So many of you will have read The Spirit Level from Professor Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, which showed the universal relationship between socioeconomic inequality, educational attainment, social mobility, trust between communities, trusting communities. Where's trust gone within our communities? Reducing crime, and much, much more. The narrower the gap between, in terms of socioeconomic inequalities, the better almost all societies across the world do on a whole host of these measures, including health and well-being. And of course, then we had Professor Sir Michael Marmot's 2010 Totemic Fair Society, Healthy Lives report, which set out 6 objectives across our life course of what we as a country need to do to address these socioeconomic inequalities and reduce these health inequalities. He warned us in 2017 when we started to see life expectancy in England as a whole flatline, and accompanied with that as healthy life expectancy. We've had loads of questions this afternoon in DWP orals about what we can do around getting a fit and healthy labour market force. And this is part of the reasons why we're in this position, is because of our inequalities. And he also revealed the life expectancy of the poorest women in the poorest areas was actually declining. And we are, I have to say, we are one of 3 countries in the advanced economies. 3 countries. Have a guess which are the other 2. the US and Iceland. So we're one of three. It's not a question we reach peak life expectancy. We are falling behind most of our competitors. And what he also revealed was that health inequalities increase, and there was an even more stark north-south health divide. And then, of course, COVID hit. The same pattern of infection, ill health, and death was seen with COVID as was seen before the pandemic with other conditions. The same groups of people, the same areas were all affected by COVID, as were affected, for example, by heart disease. Last month, Michael provided another update in his latest report, Lives Cut Short. He said in the BMJ a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the Prime Minister about this last week, if everyone had the good health of the least deprived 10% of the population, there would have been 1 million fewer deaths in England in the period 2012 to 2019. 1 million fewer. He's been able to calculate that 148,000 of those excess deaths are linked with austerity. And in 2020, the first year of the pandemic, there were a further 28,000 excess deaths. Today, I see absolutely no evidence that policymakers have learned from or even understand this injustice, nor the economic consequences. And I urge them to watch a short film, The Unequal Pandemic, which shows the human cost of this inaction. Our experience of COVID, these inequalities are not inevitable. Mr. Deputy Speaker, today's Academy report estimates a cost of £16.13 billion a year could have been avoided by early childhood intervention. 16 billion. The relationship between population health and productivity is also well established. In their 2018 Health is Wealth report, the Northern Health Science Alliance argued that to improve productivity and growth, we must improve our health. They calculated that improving the health of the nation to the level of the rest of England would increase productivity by 13.2 billion a year. It is in the economy's and the Chancellor's interest to undertake this health assessment of his measures. So I appreciate it's not going to happen for this bill, but please, Minister, I really would be grateful if you would consider it for the next one. At the Bill Committee, the Minister responded to me, and I was grateful for his response, with a long list of data that the government already collects on poverty and so on. And I was grateful to that. But unfortunately, he didn't explain how these data, when they're analysed, explain how these data were analysed to assess the impact of the government's measures on, say, stricter social security sanctions, and how these would affect the current levels of children living in poverty, deep poverty and destitution, as described in the JRF Poverty 24 report. He didn't explain if these data have been disaggregated to examine the impacts of these policies on different parts of the country, on disabled people or people with ethnic minority communities. And he didn't explain what scenario modelling on poverty, deep poverty and destitution had been undertaken to stand if more children will die before their first birthday because they had been born into a poor or destitute family. For every 1% increase in child poverty, we know that an extra 5.8 children per 100,000 live births will die before their first birthday. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Professor Sir Michael Marmot has asked us to provide hope that we as politicians can recognise and understand these inequalities must be addressed. They're not inevitable, and I agree. So again, I urge the Minister, if not now, in the next finance bill, to really consider this and to come back with a set of proposals on how they're going to do it. Thank you so much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The question is, the bill be now read the third time. As many of you say, aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is the bill be now read the third time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Tell us for the ayes, Gaga Mahindra, Suzanne Webb. Tell us for the noes, Peter Grant, Stephen Bonner. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 283. The noes to the left, 39.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 283. The noes to the left, 39. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlocked. We now come to motion number 3 on local government. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is as on the order papers. May I say aye? Aye. No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 4 on local government. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is as on the order papers. May I say aye? Aye. No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion number 5 on animals. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is as on the order papers. May I say aye? Aye. No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 6 on business of the House. Minister to move.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. The question is as on the order papers. May I say aye? Aye. Or the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now